You're tuning in to the Black Hollywood Live Network, featuring news, interviews, and commentary on all things Black Hollywood. Hollywood redefined. From Los Angeles, California, presented by Maria Menounos and streaming live thanks to Akamai Technologies. This is Black Hollywood Live. Justice is served. Featuring the week's roundup and commentary on legal news. Black Hollywood Live. Hollywood redefined.
You're listening to Black Hollywood Live.
And now, the host for Black Hollywood Live, Justice is Served.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's Justice is Served, the show where we discuss the latest in legal headlines. I'm your host, Mari Fagel.
And I'm Mara's co-host, Ebony K. Williams. So we're going to jump right into this morning. We've kind of got an urgency with this because we have a special guest with us this morning. We're joined by a really fantastic high-profile civil and criminal attorney, Chris Chestnut, out of the state of Florida. And Chris is representing, and this is kind of leading us to the facts of the case. Chris is representing the family of a 24-year-old gentleman who was unfortunately shot and killed by the Charlotte-Mecklenburg police. His name is Jonathan Ferrell, and he was shot and killed by an officer acting on duty. The officer's name is Randall Carrick, okay? So here's where we are with the case, just real quick factual catch-up. The Charlotte-Mecklenburg police chief, Chief Monroe, decided after careful consideration that he felt this officer was acting beyond force. He suspended this officer without pay, and the officer was arrested. Now, after the arrest, with this type of high-profile homicide, or any homicide for that matter, you have to go through the process of trying to obtain an indictment, and that is a formal charging of the defendant in a particular charge. And in this case, the state of North Carolina even brought in a special prosecuting team. They brought in the state attorney general, Roy Cooper, to avoid the conflict that was taking place with the local prosecutor, Andrew Murray, because he actually used to be law partners with the defense counsel of the defendant here. So everyone, I say that to say that this is, I think, being handled pretty carefully. It looks that way, that everyone's trying to take the right steps here, yet it seems like something might still be amiss, because we know that earlier this week, the grand jury declined to indict this officer on involuntary manslaughter charges. So now I'm going to bring Chris into the conversation. Attorney Chestnut, first of all, thank you so much for joining us. How are you feeling about everything this morning?
Thank you for having me, Ebony, first and foremost. But
Sure.
I'm concerned, frankly, and I think my concerns are legitimate. The Attorney General has been very suspicious in his conduct, frankly. We are hesitant to point fingers at the grand jury for the lack of indictment on the initial charge last week. As you know, the grand jury came back and said there wasn't enough evidence.
Right.
Well, I've seen the evidence.
Right.
And I think there's an
You're
abundance
talking
of
about
evidence.
the dash.
And I think that
He's
the people
talking
who
about the
would have
dash
indicted
camera. Yeah.
Officer Carrick not only with manslaughter, but probably would have asked for a murder charge had they seen the autopsy report and the dash cam video.
Right.
The dash cam video clearly shows an unarmed young African-American male approaching the police officers, not running away from them, hands out. He's posing no threat to them whatsoever, and you hear Officer Carrick shoot him. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, pause. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, pause. 1, 2.
So a total of 12 shots, is that right, Christopher? And 10 actually, hit the victim. So sad.
10 hit the victim mainly in his torso and all at a downward angle, suggesting that Officer Carrick at the time of firing his weapon is in a superior position, thus no threat to him at all.
So now, Chris,
This is highlighted by the fact that there are two other officers standing to the left and right of Officer Carrick who never draw their gun.
And they never fired. Okay, go ahead, Mari.
And Chris, so obviously the family is upset about what happened this week. You are upset, rightfully so. What is the next step? Because I read that it was only a partial grand jury, not a full grand jury, that decided not to indict him, and that they also made, in my mind, an odd request, a handwritten note asking for an indictment for a lesser charge.
That's true. Now, I will say this. We do know, as of this Monday, and correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, there's going to be a second grand jury convening because, again, Attorney General Cooper, I think maybe he was dissatisfied with the number. Because typically in Mecklenburg County or in the state of North Carolina, it's an 18-member grand jury that would decide something like this. Only 14 showed up, and you've got to get 12 votes to get the bill returned as an indictment. So that seemed like a shortfall there, Chris. How did you feel about that?
Well, here's my concern. If you can't convince 12 or 14, how are you going to convince 18? Especially with the evidence. Here's the other concern. Here's why we're suspicious. One, we were promised a probable cause hearing. So a grand jury indictment isn't the only evidence. They could have done a probable cause hearing to get the indictment, and that would have been public record.
Right.
The grand jury is secret. So we don't know, nor will we ever know, what evidence was presented to the grand jury and what evidence wasn't, which is why we're suspicious. So
I wonder why he went that route. Yeah, that's so weird to me. No, I'm just curious as to why they decided against doing a probable cause hearing, because I agree with you. I think that, first of all, opens up the transparency issue to the public and allows, because there's significant public interest because of what, let's just go there, right? This is a young black man off of the heels of the, I would say, unjustified killing of Trayvon Martin. It looks like we're getting to a place, again, in the American narrative that there's a question mark as to the value of black life, particularly black young male life. And that's why this is such a knee-jerk issue for a lot of people.
I think so. I think we also have to broaden the scope of it and say, you know what, that life matters.
Yes,
Black life matters and life matters. Because there was just a white gentleman, a homeless gentleman that was killed in California as well recently.
Yeah,
so I think what we're experiencing post 9/11 is what I call paramilitary policing, where you have overzealous police officers who need training. I mean, there's an escalation to deadly force. You just don't jump to it. And that's what Officer Carricker clearly did here.
Now, you mentioned the case in California. That was in Orange County of Kelly Thomas. He was the homeless man who was killed by police officers here, and the jury returned a not guilty verdict for those police officers. Chris, do you think when the police officer becomes the defendant, how do you handle a case like that with a jury? Because obviously the police officer is there to serve and protect in normal circumstances. How do you handle that?
To follow up with that before you answer, Chris, I agree with Mari. I think that jurors oftentimes presume credibility to officers of the law. And yes, strategically, Chris, how do you combat that presumption?
And I just want to make one quick note. The Kelly Thomas case is very similar in that there was also video evidence. There was video of these officers beating this man to death. And these jurors saw that video and still decided not to convict the officer. And the defense attorneys in that case were able to use that video to turn it around and say, oh, he was acting crazy. Can't you tell from the video? So, Chris, how can they characterize the video in your case, in Jonathan's case, in your favor?
Well, I think a lot of it does deal with public perception. And again, I think that's why it's the paramilitary policing. I think that we've got to separate our military from police domestically. And there has to be a different standard. So it's public perception, one. But two, the answer to your question directly is void ire. I mean, you've got to root out folks, and and the judge has to allow you the time to get to the core issues of bias, an unconscious bias that a juror will have or that a prospective juror will have that you've got to root out as a lawyer in void ire and get that person off the jury.
Right, and for those not familiar with the term, that's a legal term, talking about jury selection and how we pick the jury. And many attorneys, and I'm one of them, that feels like really, and tell me if you agree, Chris, probably the most important aspect of your case is jury selection. I think many times, no matter the facts, no matter the evidence, no matter your witnesses, if you drop the ball at jury selection, you are pretty much fighting a losing battle.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's
in a lot of my civil wrongful death cases, it's participated in.
Yeah. Now, to that point,
we may litigate for years,
right?
And then get to jury selection. As soon as we get to jury, they settle the case because they know there's no way they can win against this jury.
Absolutely. Now,
and vice versa.
And vice versa. Now, to that point, so we know on the legal end we've got this pending. Another second grand jury will be convening on Monday. I understand you've got some still major concerns about that, but we'll see how that goes. If that grand jury also fails to indict, the next step, I believe, you're going to do is a federal investigation. Tell us about what that would look like.
Well, then we will be soliciting the involvement of, we'll be soliciting Mr. Holder's office, Eric Holder.
The DOJ, sure.
Yeah, Attorney General, for involvement and intervention in the case.
And that would be
it is difficult to win these cases, but rarely, it's difficult to win a police shooting case, period, as you can see, recently in Orange County. But when someone's murdered live on camera by an officer, and the two officers flanking him who never shoot, I mean, this is textbook first-year law school indictment. And so if the state of North Carolina can't get an indictment, I'm sure that the federal government is capable of doing so.
What was so surprising to me was the initial reaction right after Jonathan was shot, this officer was fired, and the criminal investigation immediately started. And Ebony talked about how, they tried to avoid the appearance of impropriety by having, a different office handle the case. And we talked about that on our show, and we were saying, that we're moving in the right direction after Trayvon Martin. Unlike with that case where it took so long for George Zimmerman to get charged, here we saw the ball rolling immediately after he was shot. So what happened this week seems surprising to me.
Yeah, but then that makes the question, is this smoke and mirrors?
That's because the chief elected to arrest Officer Carrick. I mean, he's the one who made the right move. Right. So Chief Monroe should be complimented. The case started to be fumbled once it got to the litigation process, once it went to the prosecutors. And it's been fumbled ever since then. Just consistently, they've been breaking promises to us. They've been hiding evidence. They have a protective order not to release the dash cam video which shows the murder, yet they release redacted portions of a 911 call that go to impugn the character of Mr. Ferrell.
Let me ask you this, Chris. How difficult was it for you to get your eyes on that tape? Because I imagine it was very challenging.
Well, initially the chief invited us in.
Okay.
And so I saw it with the family. The chief had consented to and agreed to release the tape to us. And once the case was transferred to the prosecutor, they went and got a protective order and said, hey, no, we don't want the tape out.
So if you wanted to go see it again, could you?
They won't let us see it again.
Wow.
They won't let us see it again.
I can't even believe
and
that.
I can't.
So this is why I'm suspicious that they didn't show the tape to
the grand
jury. If you see the tape, it's very compelling.
And here's the thing that's interesting to me, because I actually personally worked side by side with many of the lawyers on this officer's defense team. And George Lauren basically suggested that the tape was good evidence for the defense. Of course, he's going to say that if you watch the tape, that it will show that Jonathan was being erratic and showing a situation. So that's what. So if that's true, right? Then show the tape.
Exactly.
Why is everyone so afraid of the tape?
If what they claim that Jonathan, they warned him not to keep approaching, and he continued to do so. So if that is the case, then exactly why not show the tape? Why not release the tape to the public
and exonerate your client? I mean, that's what I would do if the tape was good for me. So because
I submit to you the tape doesn't say that.
Right. I mean,
you got to recall, Jonathan had just been involved in a very serious car accident.
Yes.
So he's barefoot in a T-shirt and jeans and slacks, and he is walking towards them. And their allegation is that, well, we thought he was a robber. Well, a robber's not going to walk towards you. He's going to go the other way.
Right.
Number one. But number two, the commands that they issue, they never identify themselves as Charlotte-Mecklenburg police. They never say stop, freeze, etc. And when they finally do begin to issue commands, the succession of gunshots begins in such an immediate time that there was no reasonable human being could have reacted.
To me, the most egregious thing is that it was 12 shots fired.
Right.
That is far beyond warning shots. 1, 2, 3, 12? I mean, come on.
He emptied the clip.
That's crazy.
And listen, there's no need to escalate to deadly force. It's three against one. 3 officers versus 1 guy.
And you're right, Chris. It's telling to me that this guy, I mean, sorry to cut you off, but your point earlier was that there needs to be more training. And we know that to be true because this officer, Carrick, was the most inexperienced of the 3 officers on site. And, oh, look, what a coincidence that he is the one that took this measure.
Yeah. And he was an animal control officer before that, and it had only been with the police department a year, and had already been suspended. They won't tell us why. They won't give us his employee file, but he'd been suspended. And you know what? I'll tell you what's most aggravating about all of this. I mean, just shocking and inhumane is that after he had shot him 10 times on the ground, they handcuffed him. The handcuffs weren't removed from Jonathan Ferrell's body until he got to the medical examiner's office.
Oh, my gosh. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. I mean, this is just, and then you see what happens to Officer Grant. I mean, I guess I'm just getting annoyed and frustrated and disheartened with this same narrative.
Here's the thing. I thought we were moving in the right direction in post Trayvon Martin because, the beginning of how this case started out, and then in the Renisha McBride case, very similar facts in my mind of the woman who got into the car accident, went to the home to ask a neighbor for help. That neighbor actually then shot her himself, and that neighbor has been charged with manslaughter. So, to then see a jury like this, it makes me wonder, they must not be seeing all of the evidence, like Chris said.
Yeah.
I know that I think that this disproportionately does affect the African American community because they disproportionately encounter police officers. But I think this is a larger problem affecting all Americans, regardless of race. I mean, look at the shooting in Tampa this week. The guy shooting was a former cop. There's a fundamental issue with the training.
That was with the movie theater where someone was texting on his phone and a former cop shot him to death because he was texting on his phone during a movie.
Yeah.
Last month, the city of Charlotte just settled a civil lawsuit for wrongful death for shooting and killing another man. He was white, a white man in a phone tower.
To that point, I think it's also very surprising that in your case, Chris, this was the first time an actual officer was charged with a during duty shooting in 30 years in Mecklenburg County.
Correct.
I mean, that's insane. I mean, there's got to be more accountability within that office. There's got to be, I totally agree with you, Chris, more training. Why? Where is the intermediate steps before you draw your weapon and use deadly force? I mean, that's just out of control.
And let me just quickly give you some stats on the Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Department. In a 2-year period, they had 979 injuries from encounters related to an arrest. So 979 citizens were injured from the police department from encountering during arrest. Now, of the complaints filed for excessive force in Charlotte Mecklenburg community, 95.5% of those complaints went unaddressed. No discipline, no action, no whatsoever.
So essentially, that sends the officers a message that they have free reign, that they have absolute free reign. They cannot be reeled in, and we basically have no system to hold them any kind of accountable.
Well, let me ask you about the civil wrongful death suit because, I mean, luckily we have a system where the criminal case right now is not going in the direction that we want it to be going in. Tell me about the civil suit and what's going on with that.
Well, first and foremost, the criminal case didn't even start moving until we filed a civil lawsuit.
Wow.
So we've been waiting months for a criminal indictment, a convening of a grand jury. They didn't announce the convening of the grand jury until the day we filed a wrongful death suit. Because he knew we were doing a press conference, we were going to call him out on it. So part of the function of the civil lawsuit was to do just that.
To motivate
the criminal process, folks accountable. Secondly, some of the evidence, we don't know what they are or are not showing to the grand jury. What evidence, we have no control of what evidence that prosecutor presents to a jury. Well, we are able to independently propound our own discovery. We can take depositions. We can depose our own witnesses. We can go find other witnesses. We can have our own private investigators investigate. We can request records that we've been requesting via public records documents that they should give to us. They haven't been given to us. So now we can go get a court order to get them. So the purpose of the civil suit is basically to build our own case.
Sure.
In any event that they don't get justice for Jonathan through the Attorney General's office, we can do it through a civil remedy.
This is fascinating. This is captivating. Chris, if you don't mind, we would love to call you back in, in the next coming weeks. I feel like there's going to be rapid development, and our viewers and listeners are very much tied to the outcome of this case. So we want to really thank you this morning for giving us a little time. Wish you the very best moving forward with this new grand jury convening, and our blessings and well wishes to you. And certainly the family of Jonathan as well. Thank you so much, Chris. That was Attorney Chris Chestnut, everybody. Wow, just fascinating case.
I want to, Phil, the producer, is going to kill me because I keep switching around stories, but I want to talk about a story next that I think kind of fits in with a lot of things that he was talking about. What's interesting to me is that Chris said this was more than just a racial issue. He was really not making it a black or white issue. It was a police issue and an issue of police going above and beyond in negative terms. This is a clear case of excessive force. So I want to talk about a study that came out this week that, in my mind, it kind of relates to these issues. Sure. The study says that nearly 50% of black men and 40% of white men are arrested at least once on non-traffic related crimes by the time they turn 23 years old. So one thing that was surprising to me was that's not really a race issue as much in my mind. That's just a 10% difference between black and white. That it is a stark difference, but I was surprised that the difference was not even larger. Sure. But the fact that so many young men are being arrested, Ebony, what are your thoughts on this study?
I mean, I think that shows Was there follow-up data? Because I would love to know how many of those arrests led to convictions. You see what I'm saying? Because then that kind of reminds me of like the stop and frisk stuff that was going on in New York, where there were so many stops and there was a less than 10% conviction rate. It might have even been lower than that. So again, are we just looking at everyone as suspects? Every young man seen as suspicious? And if that's where we are in society, I think that's a characterization that there's a deeper rooted problem going on in our society. We should not be living in fear of our young men. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's a symptom is what I'm saying of a much deeper societal ill.
And this study was actually focusing just on arrests and not convictions because the data they used for it was not arrest data. It was the Federal Bureau of Labor Statistics. When these men apply for jobs, how many of them, they studied 7,000 young people who answered questions, including if they had ever been taken into custody for something other than a traffic offense. And this is where those numbers came out of. So this study isn't focusing on convictions and criminal justice so much as it's focusing on what is the negative impact of having the arrest alone
Just the arrest
on your
record.
record and shaping policy to try to minimize the effect that has when you do go out for a job. Because if these numbers are so high, that's going to hinder these young people. And it was interesting to me, another statistic, there's a big jump because the authors found that by age 18, 30% of black men, 26% of Hispanic men, and 22% of white men had been arrested. By 23, those numbers climbed to 49% for black men, 44% for Hispanic men, and 38% for white men. So just in those couple of years.
Because I think, again, those are the years that we get afraid of them. You know what I mean? And that's, I don't know. That's to me, we need to do some, I think, I always come back to this. I think it's education. I think it's workforce. And I think when we have more confidence in the fact that our young people are being productive members of our society, and I think most of us are, but there is still this underlying suspicion that they're not, and that mass society needs to be afraid and live in fear. And it's just sad. It's just very, very sad to me.
Yeah, and I just want to make one last comment on this study. You brought up stop and frisk, and when I read this, I thought that to me, the policy of targeting someone because it's supposed to be because you believe that they have a weapon on them, but oftentimes it's as little evidence as or suspicion as, oh, he's wearing a hoodie, he's in, a white neighborhood at night and he's a black person,
baggy pants, just stuff that's
or
silly.
he's running, in a neighborhood at night, all these little things, and that gives them the right to, approach them, and then obviously it's leading to arrests in these cases.
So I think the theme here, Mari, is artificial suspicion. You know what I mean? Just artificial suspicion, stuff that's not really rooted in what the courts designated to be reasonable suspicion. Yeah. So, all right, before we sign off here, earlier this week, and unless you were living under a rock, you know that pop sensation Justin Bieber was arrested. Arrested on, I believe, 3 charges. Suspicion of driving while not even suspicion, no, driving while impaired, resisting without a weapon, and invalid driver's license. He was released shortly after the arrest, same 24-hour period, and released for $2,500 worth of bond. So what I did an op-ed piece on CNN.com, and you can see it there if you're interested. My issue in the op-ed was really talking about how basically stupid Justin Bieber was, and he did the thing that many, many, many people do when they get arrested. He talked too much. Justin actually made a statement to the Miami-Dade police that he was drinking, that he was smoking pot, that he was taking prescription drugs. I mean, Mark, talk about making his defense lawyer's job so difficult. Because now Roy Black, who's very high profile, a lot of us girls know him as the husband of Leah Black from the Miami Housewives. But seriously, Roy, high profile criminal defense attorney. He's not going to have to circumvent that statement, and basically probably try to get it suppressed if he can, which is difficult because you have to show basically coercion. And it doesn't look like from the facts I've seen that Justin was coerced in any way. It sounds like he was just running off at the mouth and not utilizing his constitutional right to remain silent.
What was interesting when I read your op-ed piece was it made me think about a lot of the criticism of Miranda warnings. Miranda warnings is when someone is arrested, it's everything you've heard, in TV and movies. You have the right to remain silent. Any statement you use can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have a right to an attorney if you do not have an attorney.
Yes.
Yeah, if you can't afford an attorney, one can be provided for you. The criticism when that case came down in the 60s and since then has been that, if these suspects are given the warnings, then the amount of confessions will go down so much. Police won't be able to effectively do their job because if these people are warned they have the right to remain silent, they will utilize that right and there won't be confessions. The interesting thing is, and Justin Bieber is a case of this or an example of this, the number of confessions before and after the Miranda warnings has changed very, very little, very slightly. So giving you that warning hasn't really inhibited police in their job of collecting evidence, collecting information, getting confessions, and getting these suspects to talk because they can hear that warning, and sometimes it's fear, sometimes it's thinking it's better to come clean now.
Sure.
There's a lot of different motivations that go on in not using that right.
Sometimes I think a big thing, and I addressed this in the op-ed piece, many people think silence is an indication of guilt.
Yep.
And it's silly, it's easy for us to see the silliness of that as attorneys or people that know the law, but people do. And the police, they have a long leadway, and people do need to know this. The police have lots of leadway in terms of basically, they can manipulate an interview with a suspect and tell you untruths. They can lie to you and tell you that you're going to make it better for yourself if you tell us now. It's up to you to know to see through that tactic and be quiet. Another thing, Mari, I guess it's just me, but I think that there's other evidence than confessions. Let these police do their job. And that's really why I was so critical of people not using their right to remain silent. Don't hand the prosecutors evidence to convict you with on a silver platter. And that's essentially what those type of statements do. There are breathalyzers. There are field sobriety tests. There are a lot of times dash cameras. There's other evidence that the prosecutors have and can collect to also point to a defendant's guilt. You don't have to solely rely on the person just confessing. So, that's a part of the process I love, Mari. I love the adversarialness of it. Let the state be accountable for their burden. The defense is very much accountable for making an argument to raise reasonable doubt. And if both sides do their job, it can work effectively. But when there's a breakdown or an undermining of the other person's position, it becomes, I say, a corruption of the system. That's just my opinion.
And I'm going to make a prediction here on this show that Justin Bieber may very well eclipse Chris Brown in the number of times we mention him on this show related to crimes and arrests. Because, Chris Brown right now is keeping quiet in an anger management rehab facility. And some of Justin Bieber's behaviors, he's not as angry of an individual, but yet. But some of his behaviors these last couple days, he's smiling in his mugshot. Who God knows what he was on when he took that mugshot. He apparently was being given fellatio when he was pulled over.
Wow. Okay.
And also when he left the police station, he got on top of his van and smiled and waved to the cameras. This is not someone who understands the severity of what happened and feels any sort of remorse. Most people, when they're arrested and they're high profile, they hide their heads, they put the hoodies over their heads, and they jump into the car. He was loving the attention.
Not only that, Mari, I'm going to say that I think he also kind of felt validated. I think we've seen Justin in the recent years trying to become a part of, a rough culture. We see that in his entourage. I think now that he's finally been arrested, he finally has a mugshot, he feels like he's earned some type of silly street cred that now gives him, access to that type of persona. Because
apparently an egg warrant for egging your neighbor's house is not credible enough.
Right.
But the main issue to me with Justin Bieber, we'll close with Justin Bieber, though I'm sure it won't be the last time we talk about him. No. Is that this is someone, he's a young kid, and everyone in his entourage, all of his handlers, no one is willing to tell him no. No one, everyone is afraid to say, hey, Justin, I don't think that's a good idea, whether it be getting prostitutes at a brothel in some other country, whether it be bringing monkeys to foreign countries, whatever the crazy shit he does. You know what I mean? Everyone around him are enablers, and that to me is the biggest issue with him.
And I think we see that with a lot of celebs, and Chris Brown, you're right. I think that's probably a pretty accurate parallel. So it'll be interesting. Perhaps Bieber will eclipse Chris Brown in the 2014 cycle on Justice is Served.
That's my prediction.
Awesome.
And there's a lot of great stories we didn't get a chance to discuss this week, so we're going to preview them. I definitely want to talk about it next week. One is, should rap lyrics be used as evidence in criminal trials? That decision will be coming down soon, so hopefully we'll be in a state Supreme Court, so hopefully we'll be discussing that next week, as well as how police sketches play a role. That is a preview for next week. That is an actual police sketch. That is an actual sketch that was used to try to find a robber who held up two women at knife point during the day. That could be lots of people. It looks
kind of like Doug Funny to me.
Or a cartoon character. Yeah. Okay. So we'll talk about those issues next week. Thank you so much for joining us. Please let me know your thoughts on these issues. Tweet me at Mari Fagel.
Tweet me at Ebony_K, EBONI_K.
And we will see you next week.
From producers Maria Menounos, Kevin Undergaro, Phil Svitek, Dario Kristen, and the entire BHL staff, we would like to thank you for tuning in to the Black Hollywood Live Network. If you have questions or comments, tweet us at BHL Online or email us at info@blackhollywoodlive.com. For more exclusive content, visit blackhollywoodlive.com. This has been a presentation of the Black Hollywood Live Network. The views expressed here are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of BHL or its owners or principals.
Thanks for watching Black Hollywood Live on YouTube. For more in-depth interviews and news, subscribe to our channel here, and be sure to share your opinion in the comment section below here. See you soon, everyone. Bye.